Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Athlete Podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. And on today's show, I've got Daniel Tolson. Daniel is a former Australian champion athlete. He has co-led a team of more than 17,000 cabin crew and has served as a consultant to more than 15,000 business people globally. Today he's going to show you how to catapult your influence, accelerate your impact, and unleash new income levels. In addition, he's going to share specific case studies on what makes some people more successful than others and how can you can achieve the same. So put your hands together and welcome Daniel Tolson. So welcome onto the show, Daniel.
My man. Good morning to you. It's or maybe it's afternoon there. It's evening here in Taiwan. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my absolute pleasure. Obviously, we were talking off air about, obviously, I'd wanted to have you on the show for ages, and it was actually your company that reached out to me. So it's kind of, we're going to talk a lot about mindset today, but obviously having that vision board perspective is quite a good thing to have from a mindset perspective. Wouldn't you agree?
At 100%. I was having a conversation with my wife and we we're talking about the reticular activation system. And sometimes we get something in our mind and we get like this object fixation. And the more we obsess on it, the more we focus on it, the faster we start to move towards it and it starts to move towards that, to us. And many people call it law of attraction, but we also call it the law of sympathetic resonance. And two things that are resonating at the same frequency will attract one another. And so here we are. I'm attracting you. You're attracting me. And it all started out with a thought. And I know that some of the best things in my life have started out just with an idea. And then I've obsessed on it. And then over time, I've created opportunities. Now, sometimes I like to meet celebrities. And I was over in the United Kingdom in 2002. And I thought I'd like to meet a celebrity. So my friend called me and he said, hey, meet me at the airport at Heathrow at 1 o'clock. And I said, okay, I'll be there. So I showed up at 1 o'clock and I said, where are you? He said, I'm just coming through the airport. And I said, good, well, I'm at the gate. I'll see you there. And I hang up on him. About 30 minutes later, he still hasn't come through. And I rang him and I said, where are you? He goes, I've just gone through security. I said, well, hurry up. And he goes, righty, I'll be there soon. And then I'm standing there in Heathrow. All the customers have come through, and this guy walks right up in front of my face. And he's literally like half a foot away from me. And he's looking at me like I should know him. And I'm looking at him thinking I should know him. He's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me. And then he walked away. And then when he walked away, I dropped my head and went, oh my gosh, that was Neo. I couldn't even think if his name was Keanu Reeves right in front of me. But there I had my opportunity. But I think all of us, we have so many opportunities in our life and we want these things to happen. But when they are right there in front of us, we're not prepared to take action on it.
Why do you think that is, though?
Well, I think there's four big fears. The first fear that all of us have to master is a fear of being taken advantage of. And a client of mine recently said to me, he said, Daniel, I'm so afraid to ask for help because if I ask for help, I don't want to look stupid. And if I look stupid, maybe I'm going to lose control of my team. So that is the first fear. The second fear is a fear of rejection. And this is why people don't podcast. This is why they don't do public speaking, is because they have a fear of rejection. And that impacts about 99% of the population. So you could have wanted something, you could have manifested it, you could have had goals and strategies and plans to achieve that thing. And then when your time comes, you don't take action on it because you're afraid of rejection, of what other people are going to say. The third fear is really about the comfort zone. And the reason why they call it the comfort zone is because it's comfortable. And as soon as you move out of that comfort zone, it's then when you have to face your fears. And so thinking about your goals is easy. Taking action on your goals is easy. But when you really have to step out and become that person and leave your comfort zone and step into that new world where you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know what's going to happen in the future, that's when we freak out. It's like I do some public speaking, and it's easy to prepare for a speech. It's easy to write the speech. It's easy to prepare at home. It's easy to stand backstage. But as soon as they call your name, those balls shrink. They go back up inside your guts. And then you walk out on stage and you feel like you're going to piss your pants. That's when the fear kicks in, when you have to take that final step. So that's why we have people who they just talk crap all the time. It's not until the rubber hits the road that the fears kick in. The fourth one is the fear of trying and failing. And a lot of people, they prepare. But when it comes time and that rubber starts to gain a bit of traction, they freak out and they say, what if I can't do it right? What if I try? What if I fail? What's going to happen to my reputation? What are people going to think of me? And because they're afraid to try and fail, they end up pulling out at the last minute and they say, this is not for me. And we believe that at least 99% of the adult population quit on their goals before the very first attempt. Scientifically, they've done the research in America. The average American is presented with $4 million ideas every single year. People are always begging for $1 million idea. People are presented with $4 million ideas every single year, but they don't take them because of their fears.
Well, that's and I read on a link. LinkedIn is quite useful sometimes. An article, I think it was, when I would say early this year, back in the last year, about obviously emails and obviously the distress around, it's a dating terminology now that being and business people face it a lot with people going with you write a message and then people go walkabout. And the emails, the article in question was talking about the stress of having to respond to an email in a timely manner, and actually the stress of that is on the person that's having to respond. The other person, there's no time frame, there's no instant response that's needed. It's a case of, this email needs to go now. Whereas if you maybe took a backward step and took yourself out of the equation and thought, well, let me sleep on it. Let me respond without getting angry, without maybe saying some things that I might regret, and then send it. Because ultimately, it's not the recipient that's worried about getting it on time. It's the responder, and I found that quite eye-opening, because it's like, well, okay, there's a lot of things like that in terms of what you mentioned: podcasting, public speaking. I would probably differentiate the two, and people would probably be surprised that, James, why are you so an extrovert when it comes to, well, this is public speaking because obviously we're doing it live. But for me, this is okay. The only metrics that I see is you and a particular number that flashes up and down on the screen. Ultimately, we want to keep it constant, but if it goes to zero, I know after the fact that this is still going to be an auditory podcast, and obviously that might have a more of an impact in the long run. So I've always looked at it as, the podcast has got an end game, as it's got an evergreen perspective on it. It might not hit the mark on day one, week one, month one. And if I use an example of a particular episode that is now number one, I recorded that with somebody else 5 years ago, and it come out of nowhere in terms of, so you could say that was in my archives. I've got no idea that how people got access to it, because it's not like I'm promoting it. The other person is promoting it. He might have done, but to go from a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 listens to what we now about 5,000 plus over the space of the height of the pandemic, I never thought it would explode like that. But it's having the trust in terms of, if you talk about something that somebody has a difficulty with, they'll find it.
I got a video on YouTube, and my mate sends me screenshots, and he goes, "How are your videos on YouTube coming along?" And I say, "No views, no views, 5 or 10." And he sends me a screenshot of me doing a video on how to make soup. And I thought one day, I've got this new soup maker. I'm going to show you how to make this alkaline soup. And of all the videos that I hate the most, it's the alkaline soup video that gets the most video views. And he always sends screenshots to me and he says, "Look how many views you got." And I hate it because for me, it adds no value at all. It doesn't improve anybody's life. But people comment, they're like, "Oh, could you send me a PDF version of the recipes?" And I look at it and go, "Oh, out of all the things you could watch, can't you watch something else?" But if we can go back there to those emails, there's three types of people. There's three types of people when it comes to speed. We get people who are fast movers, we get people who are slow movers, and then we get the people who are actually really conflicted. So there's behavioral types that are very fast movers. So with my style of personality, I like to do things fast. I get an email and I want to respond immediately because speed is important to me. But on the other side of the coin, we have these people who are more slow, more methodical. They want time to think about it. And the reason why they want time to think about it is because they're a low-risk person. They don't want to take a risk. And even responding to an email in their mind has risk. What if I write something and it's not correct? What if I don't get my thoughts on paper and then I get penalized? So they tend to move slower. But then we get the people who are conflicted, and these are really interesting people, is that they have two parts of the personality. One part that naturally moves really fast, but under moderate stress, tension, and fatigue, then their personality changes and they go really slow. It's like Jekyll and Hyde when it comes to speed. So that's an interesting thing for people, is if the stress response kicks in and their personality shifts under stress, then they may respond really fast and then regret it later. Or they may wait too long and still experience regret. And so there is two types of personalities there that deal with speed, but you've got that third one who's a conflicted personality as well. And that's very confusing for a lot of people. And going through times of rapid change like we're going through now, COVID-19, people are under a lot of pressure. They're experiencing stress and different types of fatigue. And for me lately, James, I've been extremely tired because I'm a very creative type of person. I love to create content, and that's why I love being here with you today. And creating content, for as much as I love it, it has become exhausting during COVID-19 because I'm in that constant creation mode, creating short videos, being on podcasts, being on radio, being on TV, and it's actually becoming quite fatiguing. And I've never experienced that before. So we've got to take into consideration this new environment that we're in. And a lot of people are confused, but the environment we're in, we can't see it, but that COVID environment, that lockdown environment, it does significantly impact our personalities. And we have to learn to deal with that, especially if we want to win the mental game.
I appreciate you sharing that, Daniel. I'd probably say, and people probably find this, I won't say strange, but find it that I would probably put myself in that third one of, is in conflict with oneself of it's one of the bonuses I think, as I won't say former athletes, but because obviously the tagline of my podcast is you're an athlete because it's a mindset. But if we use it from the physical sense of you and I were both athletes at a high level, action taking doesn't make that. It's not very difficult because of the environment that we're thrust upon of other people. And I'm not saying going to make decisions for us, but you're going to follow kind of a herd mentality of, that's what success looks like. I like that picture of it, or that portrayal of it. Oh, I'm going to follow that. So it's very easy to make decisions on the fly as, okay, you are getting little bouts of success and climbing the ladder. So it's very much, I've had to sit down and collect my thoughts as, what if somebody was to replicate that for themselves in the general populace, or my audience in particular, how would they go about climbing their particular rung? So for me, that's been very thought provoking, because it's interesting, because I've never had to look at it in that
Mm.
10-year career that I had, because ultimately I was living it. And same with you. It's pretty much, I want to get from A to B. I want to go from being at club level to international. I'm not going to think about the process, how to do it. It's just naturally, there's that adage of, nature versus nurture. Athletes
Uh,
probably one in the same, to be able to be. We don't look at, okay, we've got been given a talent. It's how you utilize it. Okay, you're going to probably use it to be able to, if we put it in the modern era of, it's a brand, you're a brand at the end of the day, because of your social media presence. Of,
mm.
do athletes add value? That's obviously, that's another topic. But in terms of, you are the brand, but you and I have, be it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, before that, obviously it doesn't exist. It's I'm a byproduct of my experience. So for me, it's been unraveling that. But coming back to my point of, I'm very much that Jekyll and Hyde. If I'm put under distress, under duress, and that mindset of being quick, 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 it slowly obviously reverts back to, let me think about it logically. Let me think about it emotionally. What's the risk? What are people going to think? Is it going to be a success? You know where the rabbit hole I'm going down now, in terms of, this is something that I've obviously made evident to my audience on Facebook.
Mm.
There's no difference between procrastination and perfectionism. I'm looking for the perfect storm for this product, for this idea, to go to market, without asking anybody else's opinion. I've not
So
gone out and
there's
asked.
two. There's two. This is an interesting part, and I want to help you unpack this. There's two parts of your personality there, and the first part is it's approaching a problem and challenge, and so you want to win, you want to get the result, and what comes along with that is a fear of being taken advantage of. Now, the person who's very competitive, James, moves at a very fast pace. They want the result. They want it now. They can't wait. However, the second part that you're talking about here, it's another behavior, and it's called the compliant behavior. And the compliant behavior goes from procrastination or perfectionism. And what happens is they're afraid of making a mistake. So they suffer paralysis via analysis. So there's two parts here. One's a high risk personality, which is that I want to win, I want to get the result. And the other part of the personality here on the other side of the coin is I want to get things right, and I'm a low risk personality. So the more that you want to get things right, the more you slow down, because low risk. But on the flip side of the coin, the more you want to speed up as well. And so that's a very dynamic personality. And I was working with a gentleman recently, and he's got a multi-million-dollar business. And he goes, Daniel, I'm so conflicted. He says, because I want to win and I want to get the result, but I want to wait, essentially to what you said here, for the perfect storm to begin. And internally, it's like having a angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder.
Absolutely. Well, it's not ideal, and obviously I work in coaching. I can say to people, when that's evident to me, that, okay, can you not see that what you're doing is conflicting? Ultimately, when it's yourself, it's you don't always see it, because you've got either the tunnel vision. The other analogy I use is like being in the trenches. Of, if you actually took a bird's eye approach and looked at things over the long term or the bigger picture, you'd look at things very differently than, okay, if I focus on the day-to-day tasks, I look at the nitty gritty, the grind, lead generation, etc. Import anything that's a problem for you. You lose sight of that very quickly, because it's like, oh, my problem is 10 times bigger than anybody else's, and obviously that's far from the truth. And ultimately, how many thousands of people worldwide are going through the same ordeal?
Here's another an alternate way to look at it. my wife and I were sitting down, and she said today, she said, husband, she said, can we create some coaching content? And I said, what do you want? She said, I want you to coach me through one of my behavioural assessments so I can better understand myself. And then based on that self-awareness, I'm going to go back and I'm going to help my clients improve their self-awareness. So we started to go through her core competency index. And essentially our core competency looks at the skills that we have developed. Essentially it's our DNA. And sometimes we have the correct DNA turned on, and sometimes the DNA that should be turned on is actually turned off. So as we went through, we started to realize that one of her key strengths was visualizing the future. And my wife is great at visualizing the future. From the moment that I met her, she's had vision boards. She's been very clear what she wants, and she holds that image in her mind of where she wants to be in the future. But the fascinating part is she's so future-oriented and great at visualizing the future that she can totally depart from today, and 2 seconds later she's living 10 years into the future. And it's this beautiful part about her. And she says, husband, I understand this, I'm so optimistic. I believe that anything's possible, and all of a sudden I'm living out there in the future. And it's really inspiring. But then we started to have a look at some of the DNA that was turned off. And one of the DNA that's turned off for her was managing change. And so we started to unpack this. And she had this breakthrough. She had this aha moment. She looked at me, she said, I've got it. I've just understood why I'm so conflicted. And I said, what is it? She said, because if I have to put a plan together to achieve my goals, she goes, I feel that when I put plans together, it's so detailed that I become overwhelmed, and I feel that the details are killing my dreams. and she broke through and she's like, I finally get it. And I said, well, what's the root cause of this? Because there's always a root cause to everything. And she said, I can see it now. She said, when I was growing up, my dad wanted to move to America. Now, her father's one of the leading marine biologists here in Taiwan. He builds these fish farms, like they're 5,000-acre fish farms, these massive things. And people wanted his knowledge into Japan. So he taught himself Japanese, and then he turned all of his books that are in Chinese into Japanese and went over and did it in Japan. And he wanted to do this in America. And now her father is a visionary and her mother is an accountant. And she said, I remember when Dad wanted to move to California, he had this big dream. But I remember Mum, with her accountancy mind, starting to ask all these detailed questions. And she goes, I felt it killed his dream. So 30 years later, she's having that same challenge today. And that's what's been happening to her. And it was a big breakthrough for her just to understand the process and the strategy that she was running, albeit it had produced results in the past. It's not helping her get to where she wants to be at the moment.
So if we reversed it, Daniel, and the person was doing, fixating in the past, what would you tweak in that scenario?
First thing we've got to understand is that fully 85% of our motivation comes from the future. And this is why goal setting is so important. The fact that you set a goal means you have a future. Let that sink in. The fact that you set a goal means that you have a future. But unfortunately, about 97% of the world's population don't have goals. That also means that these people don't have a future. And if there's no goals, there's limited motivation because there's nothing to live for. So what people do tend to do is they tend to live in the past. But unfortunately, if you've had traumatic events in the past, maybe something physically has happened and it's been traumatic. Maybe it's emotionally traumatic. And if you keep fixating on that in the past, it keeps reactivating all of those negative emotions that's stored in your body, that are stored in the amygdala. And it keeps re-triggering those traumatic events. And essentially what happens, instead of that event happening once in your lifetime and you keep replaying it over in your mind, Now, if you've replayed it over in your mind, it's happened to you 100 times. And those traumas become bigger and bigger and bigger in the mind and the body because you keep reactivating them over and over and again. It's like you're putting another link in the chain. But people, if they have nothing in the future to live for, and they've only got memories in the past, they'll tend to dwell on what's happened in the past. And then they drag all of that negative emotion, those negative thought patterns into their future, and they just relive it over and over and again like Groundhog Day. So what people really have to do is people have to really rationalize what's happened in the past. And once you make the past rational, then you can let it go and you can be free from it. But you have to rationalize it. And what prevents that is that people tend to blame others for their life's problems. And as long as they blame others, they can't move forward. So it's a big thing for a lot of people. Blame, people justify. They justify all the reasons why they should be angry about what happened in the past. But as long as they blame and justifying it, then they can't move forward.
Well, I'll share something with the audience. Obviously, we were talking about this off air for a little bit at the back end of my career. So if it wasn't blaming, because you know this, injury, my mindset, I didn't want to do. These are other external factors. As in, I'm not owning the decision of in that particular sport I wasn't good enough. That was fact. That's I can own that now. 9 years on. That's a fact. I wasn't good enough to make that national program. Okay. It's a little bit of a regret, as in if I'd had the same mindset as I had at the beginning of my career of that circumstance being non-advantageous to me, as in it's, okay, I've got something to prove and obviously I've got to get better if I want to make me as a 15-year-old would have stepped up to the mark, because it's like, well, okay, I'm not good enough. So what? Let me go back to the drawing board and improve it. Whereas as a 26-year-old, I've been there and got the t-shirt and probably not got everything, but I took the easy way out. And I think I've only been honest. Well, I won't say honest. I was open and I disclosed this last year on another podcast, as in terms of I took the decision to walk away. I took the proverbial, stage right of when the curtains are closed. I didn't want to come out for the round of applause and I'm pointing fingers when I'm not getting the hoopla. Oh, well done, James. You had a good career. And why can't I have this like somebody else? But what I took from that is, and I'll share this with you, Daniel, is, okay, I chose to retire my way. I didn't want to be pushed. I'd rather jump before I was pushed. But you can't turn around and say, oh, why am I not getting the ovation that I won't say rightly deserve, the recognition that other people are getting, because ultimately they've done it in a way of preparing for retirement, and they've obviously done a swan song, thus they're going to get a good job for a career. And I chose a different path. And it was a discussion I had with he's more of my uncle than he is a performance director, but I had a discussion with him on the phone at the height of the pandemic, because I was like, well, I could have gone to Tokyo. I could have gone to Rio. He said, you didn't. You've gone to 2 games. That's an achievement in itself. You need to share your story of what you've achieved up until that would be probably 34. I still haven't written the book yet, but and share the life experiences that you've had, because ultimately, if you were to search me on the internet, most of that is like the highlights. It's what the media is showcasing of, oh, James been selected for this, selected for that. Oh, he's done this. And when I went to do my website, my web developer said, no, people don't care what you've done. The highlights. They want to see, James, what is in it for me? and what are some of the things that you've faced during that? That was hard to write that page, but it's like, because I didn't want to hear what she had to say, because it's like, oh, sure, they would want to resonate with the good stuff, but it's like, no, people don't care about that. They want to know what's relatable to them, and that's the vulnerabilities, the low times, and obviously it's been an experience to share some of that, because it's like, oh, this happened, and I did a post last week about what's the post I put out? What's the funniest thing that's happened to you the first time you had your prosthetic? And some people were sharing some things. Oh, I can relate to that. This time, this happened to me. So, given like funny stories of what's happened to me, I'll share it on today's episode. It was when I was rowing, and I went out for a training session with my coach. Left the prosthetic by the side of the pontoon, and this was late at night. Somebody rang up the police to say, "Oh, I think somebody's jumped into the river." We got a right bollocking by the police because they didn't see the funny side. It's like, and obviously my audience being amputees, they can relate to that, because like, well, if you would have wanted to, I'm not saying kill yourself, you would use the prosthetic because it weighs something, it weigh you down. But the police wouldn't see it from that side. It's like, oh, next time could you not put it in the car, the container, in the boat shed? It's like, well, I don't know why that person went to the extreme in the first place, because it's like, oh, well, somebody could have nicked it or something like that. It's like, why have you gone from, oh, this device, this aid, to, oh, I think somebody's jumped in the river and there's no sign of them? It's like, well, so they found that hilarious, because it's like, oh, it's better than my story. But it got me thinking, because of what they'd said about their experiences. Oh, I've got a story, not to top it, but kind of go, well, here you go, this is a funny story, and that's obviously made you laugh, because it's like, well, to me that's I saw the funny side, because like, but the police, obviously being the authority, didn't, because like, oh, next time could you do something else with it?
I remember my dad with his false teeth. My dad he had rheumatic fever and he lost his teeth, and he'd go to the pub with his mates, and if he wanted their beer, he'd put his false teeth in their beer. I think, James, it's like Aussies and Brits. They love to have a crack. They love to have a joke. They love to pull your leg, for a better word. But I think people are so afraid to laugh these days. I think for somebody like yourself, if you see the funny side in it and you can laugh at it, I think people should be able to feel that they can get in on the joke and laugh with you. But I think we get so bullied by the media today. I remember David Beckham not long ago. There was a photo of him giving one of his kids a kiss on the lips. And like, they just took it to such a ridiculous extreme. It's a dad who loves his kid. It's a kiss on the lips. There's nothing else to it. But I think we get penalised so easily for it. As I mentioned offline, we used to employ a gentleman by the name of Frank Whirl, and he was my godmother's brother. And he had lost his arm in a motorbike accident. And he would tell stories about his arm all the time. He would say, Daniel, I'd stand out the front of the shop, and people would drive down the street and they'd wave to me, and I'd wave back at them. And then a week later, they'd come back and say, hey, Frank, we drove past you the other day. We waved at you and you didn't wave back. And he's like, I was waving. But he gets phantom limb pain. So he's got that phantom limb. So he thinks he's waving, but his arm was taken off years ago. Now, he saw the funny side of that. So shouldn't we be able to laugh with him? And he used to talk about cooking. And he'd say, Daniel, before I had the arm cooked off, I would be cooking in the kitchen and I'd smell like something burning, like burning skin. And I'd be like, that really stinks. That's really bad. And he couldn't figure out what it was. So then he'd look around and he'd realise that his arm, which had gone dead, had fallen in the pan and was getting burned. And he'd tell that story. And it's something that I would have never thought of in my life, but I could see the funny side in it. Not because we're laughing at him, but we're laughing with him because that was just his life experience. But I
Well,
think we're so sensitive today.
that's what I try and do when I'm with my peers within the fitness industry. Of okay, all my coaches, clients, or myself included, are all able-bodied. And what did I do a few years ago? He's ex-military, so very respectful of the order of women and children first, and then everybody else. And I come out with a comment, and I think everybody was in shock. As in, I said, "Shouldn't the cripple be next?" And everybody within my audience has found that hilarious. Some people not so much, but it's like he took a moment to step back because he known me a long time now. But at that particular time, I think about a year and a half or 2 years, and he's like, "Oh, James, you seriously just said that?" I was like, "Well, I can't take it back. I've said it out loud. I've thought about it. Let's have a wise crack." I think it's hilarious because ultimately, I think I was on my crutches at the time, so it's fact. And obviously, they're grown men, the rest, and they're quite conditioned, so they are quite physically able. But that got people to see my sense of humor, so to speak, because and it's quite that I don't think it's that dark, but it's quite out there as well. If you can laugh about his disability from that extreme, and I think the other occasion was we happened to be doing cold water immersion, so we did it in the North Sea, and I had this little old lady come up to me as, "Oh, it must be difficult to walk on the sand with crutches," and people were surprised. Well, do you get that on a daily occurrence? Like, yeah, you'd be surprised how many people would randomly come up to me and ask me, be it for the prosthetics on the crutches. For me, that's normal. I've grown accustomed to that. In adulthood is normal. I probably would have had a
Mm.
problem with it as a child because it's like, well, I don't want to talk about it. I want to be normal. I want to be just like everybody else, and that's something I've shared, and it's horrified people because I've come out and said more like as a headline, I wish I was anything else but disabled. I've got very good, very clever with content because that's going to stop people in their tracks. For
Mm.
podcast hosts, they've kind of gone, they're sick to the stomach. Like, how can you think that way? Because coming back to the other point that you said, I'm rationalizing that that's a fact and that's how I felt. I know all amputees at some point in time would have felt the same way. That's going to hit the mark. But that's how I felt as an 11, 12, 13-year old. I wanted to be like everybody else. I wanted to be able to partake in sport to the best of my ability. And in my eyes, the disability was holding me back. Obviously, we
Mm.
fast forward 25 years on, we pose a different question of if it's not for the disability, doesn't open doors. It's pretty much it's a snowball effect. I don't have the disability. Okay, you got to line that with the fact that I was good at sport. I don't go to the Paralympics. Obviously, the sport opens doors, and then obviously I can tie it into a nice bow and a nice. I'm appreciative, very much so, of the chainal effect that this had, and very much like the domino effect of it's very much. I've ran with what I've got. I've got to owe it to my family. Of they're very, you could say, typical British people, stubborn as okay. James has got disabilities, so what? We're not going to treat him any differently, and that's probably why I when I knew I could see and have that foresight and awareness that I can see that I'm not like everybody else. I want to be like everybody else because they seem to have it all together. Obviously, I know as an adult that's not true, but at that age, it's like, well, I've got this on top of puberty. Oh, my life is crap. But it's been it's a massive tool now because I can go to the limb difference community with the people that are born with disabilities and say to the parents, do you want me to showcase to your son or daughter my experience of, I won't name the person, but this particular one's got a 6-year-old son who's going through the same ordeal that I faced as a preteen. So if I can showcase to you that, okay, I thought like that as well, look what I've achieved. I'm not saying you're going to be able to want to do that or you want to go down the same route as me, but look at what avenues I've been able to use without social media
Mm.
and be able to see. So my point I'm making to the audience is the world's your oyster now, because you've got TikTok, you've got Instagram, you Twitter. I wouldn't know where to put it now, but
Mm.
you can showcase your story to the world, and ultimately, I think through the height of the panic, I can't speak. Through the height of the panic, has shown that people wanted to be inspired, they want to be motivated, they want to be immersed in something that's positive.
Mm.
For me, that's not difficult, because I've probably got stories coming out my head. It probably could explode. Of it doesn't take much to speak to my mother, speak to my aunt, to kind of go, well, what have you got a story of? What was I like at such an age? Epiphany moment. I forgot about that. And then so the book, I think the only, I won't say saving grace, is coming back to your earlier point of this, the stopping gap is, what are people going to get out of it for reading it? What are people going to get to, if it was to go into the audio form? What do I think that they're going to get value from? So it's trying to go, well, do we go down the autobiography route? Do we go down the self-development route? So these are all things that I'm probably doing deliberately to not make it happen, because it's like, well, if I can put roadblocks in my way, I don't have to do it.
I had an experience the other day. I was walking with my 4.5-year-old boy, and we're walking through the park. And the first thing that we've got to understand about humans is humans are empathetic. And that's how they connect. And we talk about walking a mile in somebody else's shoe. And we're trying to do that out of curiosity. And humans are curious by nature. This is why we've explored the world. This is why we've gone into outer space. This is why we create machines and computers and cameras, because we're curious. And we've got to get curious in order to understand people. So I'm walking along with my boy, he's 4.5, and we walk through the park. And James, there was literally thousands of people there. But he saw one guy, and he said to me, he grabbed my hand, he said, "Hey, Dad," he goes, "look at that guy." And I said, "Which one?" He goes, "That one here." He goes, "He's got a robot's leg." And so he saw a gentleman who'd lost his leg, and he saw the leg, but in his mind, he had a robot leg. And he was fully fascinated. And you could see it was genuine fascination. Children don't have a conscious mind. Children don't judge. They're totally unconscious. And their awareness is like, wow, I wonder what that is. And so rather than shaming my boy, which I see a lot of parents do, they're like, don't stare, don't ask questions. I promoted curiosity and empathy. And so I said to him, well, what do you think's happened? I wonder why he's got a robot leg. And then he said, "Dad, can we get a little bit closer?" And he wanted to get a little bit closer because he's trying to figure this out, but he was absolutely fascinated about it. Now, unfortunately, I don't speak the Chinese language, but if I did, I would have loved to have a conversation with the gentleman, because it was something that my son was trying to figure out, because it's something that he's never seen before. But there's no malice in it. It's genuine curiosity. And I think, like that lady said to you, it must be hard. What they're trying to figure out in their mind is, wow, if I was in the same situation, I would find that hard. And I think some people find it hard to express their thoughts. They try to find it hard to express their feelings, but they're trying to connect. They're trying to say, if I was walking a mile in your prosthetic, I believe it would be hard. And probably hidden inside that, they're probably saying, good on you, son, you're going for it. I know so many people have given up because they didn't get the latest handbag or watch, and look at you go for it. You bloody legend. Keep going. So I think empathy is really, it's the glue that brings us all together. Empathy is understanding other people's emotional makeup. It's the fourth pillar of emotional intelligence. Empathy is trying to understand why other people think and feel the way that they do. And all of us empathize with other people. We look at people and we say, what are their strengths? And what are their limitations? Now, oftentimes, James, we have more empathy for other people than we do for ourselves. People are very empathetic for other people, but they don't have self-empathy. And I want to come back to some of your achievements here in sport. And a lot of us have this feeling of unfulfilled expectations. We set these big, hairy, audacious goals, but we do it from a place of a lack of self-understanding. And I remember when I set my goals to be an Australian champion athlete, my first goal was to be an Australian champion athlete in my first year. Now, in hindsight, looking back, that was a stupid goal, and it set me up for failure and it set me up for disappointment. The goal was too big in relation to time. I didn't have enough experience, so I set myself up for failure, and that's called self-sabotage. But without the wisdom and without having conversations with mentors and other people who have walked this path, we keep repeating these same mistakes. So year after year, I kept resetting the same goal, but I had no self-reflection. And this goal was absolutely ridiculous for all of the barriers that I had to overcome. So on the way to achieving my goal to become an Australian champion, I had to reflect. I grew up with learning disabilities. I had a lot of illness. I had a lot of sickness. And my biggest fear, my disability, was my mindset, because I just didn't want to get hurt again. I was so far behind other people at school. I'd missed out on so much school that I was always behind. I had so many allergies, asthma, collapsed bronchial tubes, twisted spine. I was tone deaf. And so I had this fear of getting hurt. And so I had to overcome that big hurdle. That was the big hurdle for me. But nobody ever showed me how to overcome that. And when I would go out and I'd ride and I'd train on the trampoline, I'd see my brother jump higher than me on the trampoline. I'd see my brother jump higher than me on the wakeboard. But I was comparing myself to him, but I wasn't taking into consideration the mental blockages and challenges that I had to first overcome. He didn't go through learning disabilities. Anything my brother touches turns to gold. He didn't have to overcome those blockages, but I kept comparing apples to oranges. And that just set me up for a feeling of unfulfilled potential. I then had 2 major knee surgeries, and then I had to overcome that. And then eventually, after 9 years, I achieved my goal. But what I got in that, James, and I think for all of us who have been limited in some way, shape, or form, the gift that we get is we get the gift of resiliency, because we've fallen down so many times that we've had to get back up. And what I realised, James, after 9 years, I finally achieved my goal of becoming an Australian champion athlete. But I learned so much about myself along the way. I realised that nothing could hold me down. Where these other people who'd gone out and they'd achieved the goal in the first year, you didn't see them in the second year. They didn't come back in the third year. You didn't even hear their name being mentioned on the fourth year. But my greatest success was not being a world champion. It was not being the pro champion in my country. It was me hitting a realistic goal for me, all things considered. Considering the mental blocks I had, considering the emotional blockages I had, considering the fears that I had to overcome, my sacrifices. And so what I figured out was becoming an Australian champion in the men's division was perfect for me. The others had different advantages, and they also had to overcome different challenges, and good on them. But we can't compare our journey to others because there's no 2 journeys the same.
Well, I think that's why I think people I like to compare it to, I shouldn't use compare, but I like to showcase to
I'll give
people.
you another word: calibrate.
Well, it's to showcase, the difference between comparison and competition, because society says competition is bad. It's like, well, is it really? Because if you and I are on the both on the same level, we're going to push each other up. So that's competition. It's not comparison. It's competition. Whereas I think people, especially within the amputee community, will look at Facebook groups that's support groups as, oh, why am I not at the level of that other individual? It's like, well, you don't know where he started from, or he or she, I should say, he or she started from. So you're
And we
not
also
giving them.
don't know where they're going to finish.
I've never thought about it that way. But I think people get obsessed as, oh, that person's walking sooner, that person's running, that person's doing whatever, and obviously the person might be still in a wheelchair or using a walker. It's like, but that's their journey, and it's trying to showcase to people that, hey, did I expect to be where I am today? No chance. 2-time Paralympian, all the accolades that I've got in introductions, no. It's been, I think the TEDx one was trying to find something comparable to the sport, and once I'd got that, I was like, I think I can do that better. But to get there, and it was speaking to other guests as, oh, James, I'd expect you to already have multiple. It's like, I don't even know where to start in terms of how do I get it, because ultimately what people don't see when they watch TED or TEDx as the organizers got a lot of sway as who they want to have on their platform. And if you don't fit the bill, you're not going to get through that first hurdle. So it took me 2 years, and I'd say it was probably harder than the sport in some sense, because it's very challenging, because you're thinking, oh, well, what am I doing wrong? Why is my stuff not good enough? My story is amazing when it comes to speaking things, because of the resilience you talked about. Of, I never fully embraced the adversity of what I've overcome, and it's taken probably a deep soul searching to kind of go, well, hey, compared to somebody else, yes, it's adversity. For you, it's not, because that is your square one, and obviously you've hit the ground running, and you've persevered on with it. But you need to embrace that as adversity, because that's what it is. If other people see that as adverse, that's what it is. And once I've accepted that, it's like, hey, what can we build upon? If that's adverse, and the fact of me not wearing shorts as a teenager, that's not a big objective to overcome for me, because it's like, well, people have said, well, at that age, it's like groundbreaking, because you've overcome something that is to do with your image. I didn't see it like that 20 years ago. I had a problem with it. I'm overheating, I'm sweating. It doesn't affect anybody else, so there's got to change. So that's coming back to the beginnings of we talking about quick thinking. Is I don't agree with the circumstances I find myself in. I can change that. Let's go ahead and do that. The misnomer with this is I wore shorts in PE. So it still blows my mind, because it's like, well, in a sporting setting, why are you comfortable? And those peers are exactly the same.
It's environment. We, in terms of our operating system, the way we think, it changes based on the environment. It really changes. And I remember this when I was doing a lot of dating when I was younger. I'd meet these girls, and I'd want to talk to them on the phone, but they'd want to send text messages. And so the relationship starts on text message. And they were a totally different personality on the text message. And then you change the environment, you met them face to face, and they had nothing good to say. Environment plays a huge part in our personality. It really does. And these are the comfort zones. We have comfort zones, and we have areas that we just haven't mastered yet. But I also believe that there's just places we shouldn't even go. It's like, for me, James, I've learned a lot about myself over the years, and I'm competitive. I'm aggressive. I'm a great athlete. I just want to win. I'm not trying to compete against anybody else other than me. I'm just trying to see how far I can go. I don't look at other people. I don't care about where they are. I just want to see how far I can push myself. Can I shave another half a second off this? Can I shave another second? And if I get it, that's my victory. If I don't, I get the learnings, and I keep going until I achieve it. I know that about myself. For me, I know that outside of work, I'm much more extroverted. But when it comes to work, I'm more introverted. But I understand how to utilize that part of my personality. When I'm outside of work, I'm more outspoken. But when I'm working with my clients, I say less because that's what's required of me at the time. I'm going to ask the questions. I'm going to dig through the details and I'm going to try to understand the situation. So what I do is I play to that strength and I put myself in an environment where that gets rewarded. The other thing in my personality is I like to move fast. I like high-risk environments and I like drama. And if there's no drama, I get bored. So having a business is perfect for my personality. Being an employee is not good for my personality. Because if things get boring and I'm working in somebody else's business, I can't create a drama. But in my own business, I can create as many dramas as I want and I can put out as many fires as I want, and that turns me on. So we've got to understand these things about our personalities, and then you've got to play to your strengths. Don't, it's like I say to people, don't try to change all these limitations. Don't try to get rid of the weaknesses. Just play to the strengths. For me, when it comes to focusing on details, I would love to be a pilot. I would love to be a doctor, but I don't have the patience to focus on all the details and to focus on all those standard operating procedures. So knowing that now, I don't set the wrong goals for myself. I set the right goals for myself, and I'm more intuitive. I like to work at a fast pace. I like to work with a minimum of details. I like to connect the dots myself. And so the perfect job for me is this style of coaching that I do. Nothing else. It's just this one. And so I play to my strengths. And playing to your strengths, it automatically stops you comparing yourself to others. And that's what I've learned over the years. And I think if anybody could take just a little golden nugget of advice, is figure out what your strengths are, play to your strengths, and screw the weaknesses. Don't worry about them. Just focus on your strengths and focus on that. And as you build teams of people around you to support you in those areas where you're limited. And I promise you, there's somebody out there, your limitation will complement their strength. And that makes you a stronger person.
I appreciate you sharing that, Daniel. Obviously, we're coming to the end of the show, and I like to ask this penultimate question to all my guests. I'm going to ask it slightly different for you today. If you got to sit down with any coach, for that matter, dead or alive, who would that be and why?
Well, I've sat down with the person. It was Brian Tracy, and Brian Tracy wrote a book called Maximum Achievement. And my uncle gave me a copy of his book when I was 19. And on the inside cover, he wrote, "To Danny boy, this is your blueprint of success." And he said, "Daniel, if you apply what's in this book and you do what successful people do, you'll get the same result." And after being in real estate for 6 months, I'd saved up enough money to get a deposit on a house. And my mentor, who was my uncle, he said, "Hey, look, you've done really well. I'm going to invest in you and we're going to buy our first property together." So we bought our first property, and then I bought a second property. And then after that, I said, "I don't like real estate. I'm going to go travel the world." And eventually I went and traveled the world. And when I was about 35, a friend of mine, Alex, a boss, he's going to be in London soon. He said to me, he said, "You know what?" He goes, "There's a guy named Brian Tracy, and he's got a business." He goes, "I reckon you should get involved in it." And so he got the ball rolling, made a couple of introductions, and then I ended up owning a Brian Tracy franchise business. And so I've sat down with him, and I've even had the pleasure of speaking on behalf of Brian Tracy. Now, Brian Tracy's written 74 books. He's addressed more than 5 million people, and I knew his work so well. When he got sick, I was actually invited to speak to 250 of his clients in San Diego. So I always wanted to learn from Brian Tracy, ended up doing business with him, ended up speaking on his behalf to his audience, and also hired him as my personal coach. And that was the goal, and I've achieved it.
And my final question before we wrap up the show is, if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
Focus on what you want. Focus on what you want. Only focus on the things that you want, because what you focus on grows. So just focus on what you want. to the exclusion of anything else. Just delete all the other stuff out and pay no attention to it. Focus on what you want.
So once again, Daniel, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
My pleasure, mate. It's been a pleasure to be here, and you're doing wonderful things in the community. And I know that this is just the start of your journey, and you're going to impact so many more people in the months and years ahead. You're doing great.
I appreciate that.